call this meeting to order.
20 minutes.
5:30, special board meeting, Monday, November 20th, 2023, 5:30 PM. Can I get a roll call?
Sterling,
Here.
Thompson,
Here.
McKnight,
Present.
Carlson, here, Smith,
Here.
Hastings. Here. Meeks is absent. Chris Ardrino, recording secretary.
Roy Yarborough, Superintendent.
What do you do with Secretary Pro Tem?
Shelley Wagner, Human Resources.
Michelle Earp, Curriculum and Instruction.
Josh Rand, Business and Operations.
Yeah.
All right. That,
There's somebody coming in.
1 second. Oh, hold on for 1 second.
Evelyn or Jason?
Is it Jason?
Evelyn.
Evelyn.
Jason coming?
All right, and Ellen, can you announce yourself for the roll call?
Evelyn Meeks, sorry.
Sorry.
What your name, Ellen? Okay. All right, with that,
All right.
turn it over.
Is that hyphenated on the last
Can I
one?
get everybody to stand
Dennis Reese.
for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right. Get a motion or a second to approve of the agenda.
Motion. Second.
Mr. Sterling?
Aye.
Mr. Thompson?
Aye.
Mr. McKnight?
Aye.
Mrs. Carlson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Hastings?
Aye.
Mrs. Meeks? Aye.
All right, Dr. Troy Yarborough.
All right, so the mission of the Harlem Consolidated School District as a vital part of the community is to help diverse learners realize their unlimited potential by providing an educational program dedicated to academic excellence and the development of strong character in a safe and respectful learning environment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, turn it over to Rex.
All right. Thank you. So for the first item tonight, it's a recommendation to approve a life safety amendment to the repair and reinforcement, the brickwork and the tuck pointing that we did, or that we're doing at the high school. The board approved this a few months ago, and we kind of dug in and are looking at some challenges there. So Tracy and Chris, Tracy from DLA and Chris from Raymond, are going to kind of talk through this. So Tracy's going to go through a little bit of history, so I don't want to steal her presentation. So I'll turn it over to Tracy Peterson from DLA.
Hello, everyone.
Hello.
Can everybody see?
Yeah, that's vernacular. It's all good.
I'm gonna go over there.
Oh, there you go.
About 3 years ago, the front of the building, close to, on the north facade, close to door number 2, we think over the winter, some snow slid down a roof and kind of put some pressure on the back of a parapet, which caused some brick ties in the brick area over here that you can see here. Kind of made the brick ties fail and just the front facade brick fall forward. And so that was kind of our first indication that there was definitely some tuck pointing that needed to be done and that we needed to look more into what was going on with the original construction of the building. Here,
She should be able to.
Tracy, you might be able to touch this.
Yeah.
There you go.
so what we found is when we opened up the wall, we found that there was a lot of water coming into the building through not only the joints, but how the building was originally detailed. The building, basically, the older part of the 1970 building only had 2 Ys of brick, and there really wasn't any way for water that would get into in between the wall to escape. And so what was happening was there was a lot of corrosion happening on these brick ties, and that's really what failed. And a lot of the water was staying inside the wall and rusting these steel beams that were over the clear stories of the windows. These steel beams are quite big and are actually, these beams act as lintels. So what we had to do in that case was we had to come in and clean off all the rust. We had to come back and add brick ties, and we had to add some stiffeners in the web of this steel beam. This was right after COVID started in 2020, And, you know, we're dealing with a lot of supply chain issues and stuff like that. And so we also had some challenges with the existing steel not being plumb or square or level. And so we couldn't really put brick back in easily. And so what we ended up doing was coming in with this metal panel, which I think was able to improve the building because we were able to have some extra space that we didn't originally have with the brick there, to put some insulation in there, to get the proper flashing in the wall, and to be able to weep it, so if water ever did get in the future, that we could weep it out of the wall through weeps. And we were also able to caulk between this metal panel system and the existing windows. And we were also able to add a metal coping over an existing stone parapet cap that had joints in it that was also allowing water into the building.
I'm
So
sorry, real quick, weeping, I'm not familiar with the term.
weeping is, there's
What
different
happened
ways to
after
let
the
water
bear scheme?
Yeah, that
that
too.
gets into the wall out. You want to allow it to flow back out of the wall through weep holes, which are sometimes these little honeycomb plastic things that you might see in a masonry wall in a mortar joint, and that lets the water out way,
Sure,
way
brick
back.
drain.
Yeah, it's a drain, it's a wall drain.
All right.
A long time ago, they used to use cotton sash cord, so you might see little pieces of
Oh,
string
sure.
sticking out at the bottom of a wall or at the top of windows. And over time, like 100 years, that would disintegrate and leave behind a nice hole for the water to come out through the mortar joint, so.
Hey, thank you.
So, what we found is during our tuck pointing project,
Can I ask a quick, that's
Yes.
right in the pool area, correct?
yeah.
That's the pool area right on
Yeah,
the
story
side.
2 is
Just to the
right
left of the
here,
main
and the
entrance.
pool
Correct,
is a
yep.
little bit farther down.
Okay,
Yeah.
gotcha.
So as part of our project for the CTE, we were including the first highest priority of tuck pointing to start addressing some of these issues. So we went around and surveyed the exterior of the building and found the highest priority. And then there's gonna be in the years to come, a second and third priority of tuck pointing that will kind of address some of the mortar deterioration that we were seeing. And so in doing so here's where the work was done about 3 years ago.
Just one note too, after we fixed, because the insurance paid for the first leaning wall thing that was almost falling, we noticed that there was a couple other areas that looked a little off, so we really spent a full year at least going through and opening sections and making sure whatever that scope was, because if you've noticed, the entire building is brick and with windows on it. So if they didn't do it right in one area, we had a pretty good feeling that there were other issues. So Tracy
Yes.
and her team, we took a long time looking at that. And then we tried to prioritize what is the biggest need to fix, which is the work that we're doing now.
Yes, and so we did do some investigative work where we could to look inside the walls, to gauge how the existing steel behind would have been rusting. In this case here, the current scope of tuck pointing included some tuck pointing done in the courtyard, and we focused on the original 1975 portion of the building as the highest priority. And the second area that we're going to talk about today is an area that's a clear story above the cafeteria.
So the windows in the cafeteria, yeah, to the north.
So here you are up at the roof looking down into the cafeteria here. And so this is kind of, you can start to see, there was some metal kind of put over the joint between the brick and the top of the windows. And the detailing, the original detailing, which we'll see in several areas, had a chamfer on the bottom of the brick. And unfortunately, that kind of directs the water at the joint between the top of the window and the wall. And so I think that that's why at some point that metal was kind of put on to stop that from happening. This is the detail of the existing building that shows that here we really had only 2 courses of brick here, and here's the steel beam that you'll be seeing in some more detailed photos. And there's no cavity in there. There's no air and vapor barrier. There's no flashing or weeps that I was talking about here. So basically water is getting in the chamfer or the stone parapet cap or just in the joints itself. and it really has nowhere to go and travel back out except to go right to this beam. And in some cases, there's really no insulation or not much behind the beam, so if it makes its way past the beam, it's getting to the drywall that's on the interior side of the wall. So that's the chamfered brick. So this is where the masons were starting to kind of prep the wall to do the tuck pointing. And this is where we noted that there was some water damage on the interior side of the cafeteria. It's drywall. And so as they were able to take the brick off, one of the things that we need to do to thoroughly analyze the condition of the steel is to have all of the rust removed. We did have our structural engineer come out to the site and he visually looked at it. And so right now, there's best way to determine the damage of the rust is to use a micrometer to measure its thickness, and that's how the structural engineer will do some calculations to determine if there's some weak areas in the steel and how they should be reinforced. And that's similar to the first photo I showed you. That's what I wanted to show you, that first photo, is because we did just put stiffeners along the webs. So there's many different ways that we might need to address it, but the first step is going to be to clean off the rust.
How do they do that? Just a grinder and something?
So what we're gonna do is come in, you have your,
Flat weight?
they're called, the structure of an I-beam is you have the web. The web is in the background right here, and then you have your two legs coming off, your top leg and your bottom leg. Because the bottom leg is so close to the storefront glazing system that's right there, we're gonna take a grinding wheel and most likely hand grind off, only along 200 feet on the bottom of the I-beam, and then the web in the back, we're actually gonna come in and sandblast it. And I have a meeting tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. to go over that.
So you can see some close-ups of what's happening on the bottom flange. You know, we're seeing some flaking, and so with that loss of section, that's where the structural engineer will come out after it's cleaned and work with the contractor to drill some holes in, and he'll be able to put his micrometer in sections of the web, or simply be able to put that micrometer up against the flange and see what that thickness is. And if there's like a 1/16 or an 1/8 of an inch loss, then he can run some calculations and figure out, do we need to reinforce it with like a steel plate or a stiffener? And then we'll be able to build it back up with the brick.
So in order to get his micrometer in there, which is the photo on the right, we're gonna come in and drill 4 3.5-inch holes across the outside of the brick, evenly spaced, going along 200 feet. So that allows you to get an accurate measurement from the micrometer. That takes care of the outside, and then on the inside, we're gonna go in, cut 4 1-foot by 2-foot holes so we can see the condition of the beam on the inside of the building as well.
Tracy, can I ask a question?
Yes.
How do you refill those holes after you drill these big holes in that I-beam?
I'm going to leave that up to my structural engineer, but yes, there will be a method for patching where needed, as well as if certain areas are found to be thinner and need to be patched with, whether it's a steel plate or an angle or those stiffeners. Yeah, he'll come up with those, do all the calculations.
Typically, if you have a hole in a beam like that, say if you have to have it structurally designed at the beginning of the project, they'll pre-bore holes in beams, and you'll put a flat plate, on either side of the hole, and that stiffens up the structural integrity. And then that's along with the stiffener plate going in perpendicular to the face of the beam.
Tracy and or Chris, and you might be getting to this, so let me know. Can you let the board know, why it's important that we do this? Obviously we don't want the leaning, that we had with the high school in 2020.
Right.
But why is it so important that we do this now as opposed to wait?
Well, definitely we need to analyze to see if that rust has caused a change in its original loading conditions. So that's the main thing that we want to check, and then we want to reinforce it to bring it back to its, to be able to carry its original loads. And so that will, along with rebuilding the wall, putting back in the proper flashing and the weeps, from the backside, putting in the insulation and replacing all the damaged drywall, that will extend the life of the building. And so then, that will be the first step here, And then we'll know, we've got to look at, as we prioritize the tuck pointing and the repair of some of the other areas, we'll look at that as well. So that's why the amendment is written to do the investigation work as well as the repair work on the outside and the inside.
And when she says amendment, and what we're voting on tonight or asking for approval is, this is life safety funds, so we have a separate fund for that, and we approved it that way, but Tracy called the state, and typically, it doesn't work this quick, but they're willing to approve this amendment so that this additional cost will be covered by our life safety funds that way.
I have a question too. I know you're gonna probably get to it. Are we gonna go back with brick on that, or are we gonna do the same kind of like corrugated steel that we did over on the other side? And what's the cost difference and what's the pros and cons of doing each way?
It's a great question.
We did actually talk about just that thing. We wanted to look at not only.
Because nobody
lead
sees this,
times-
right?
Right.
Right, that was certainly a consideration. We want to go with the most economical that will return the wall to have the proper integrity it needs. And since aesthetics aren't a big concern here, the bigger concerns are economics, ability to get the material in a timely fashion, and the ability to get the work done before, winter really comes on us. So we took those considerations, and I think Ringland can maybe speak to what pros and cons are.
So the pros would be doing it back all in brick, is we have all the brick included in the original tuck pointing scope work, which was part of the main building project to begin with, and then it was taken out and we repriced it to focus on certain areas throughout the building. So right now, removing all of the face brick, if you will, and then replacing it was included in part of the main pricing. So we already have that brick on site. It's sitting outside of the existing precast building, or part of the building. I don't know what that houses, but it says you're driving back into the site on the right-hand side, going back into the courtyard. So we have all the new bricks sitting there. If we were to go into doing metal panels, it would bring into play a couple of different trades other than just masonry. So off the top of my head, we'd have carpentry, roofing, which would involve the metal cap on the top, which DLA and some other contractors did a few years ago. And that was to kind of stop the water coming in through the existing stone cap, which we're doing all around the building. So
lead times. I mean,
lead times
metal
too,
panels
metal
probably
panels.
4 to 6 weeks or something for metal panel to get it on time and be able to get it for winter. I mean,
So as soon as we can get basically it cleaned and the structural engineer back out here to do his measurements and he can do his calcs, and we can figure out what the fixes are to the steel, then the masons can be right behind and build it back up, because all of the materials are already, like Chris said, the brick is on site, and that scope of work of the brick building, rebuilding the parapet was already in the project, so this amendment, the estimates in there are very conservative. And, it does include some contingencies, since we don't really know right now what that full scope of structural repair is. But it is kind of a worst-case scenario, so that, nobody's held to that number that the amendment is written. That's just kind of a, kind of a maximum for that. So we do, hope it comes in less than that, so just wanted to let you know about that, that there's, yes?
I guess my question is on the other project that we did in 2020, did we use the metal because it was more cost effective or because it had more structural integrity?
Actually, there were two things that were in play. We were originally going to go back with the brick, but once the brick was taken down, we realized that that beam actually came out at you, and so it wasn't in the same plane as the rest of the building, and the brick that was sitting on there had a very, very, very tiny ledge to sit on, and that's one of the reasons why it was so weak and it fell forward. So we didn't want to come back and have brick sticking out, and it happened that the contractor we were working with had that metal panel in town, because at that time, insulated metal panel, you couldn't get it anywhere. They just happened to have that, and the color was perfect. So we lucked out, and it was more economical, I think, than some other options. So that was really the reason why we went that direction.
Okay.
So the other item that's on the amendment is the courtyard. In the courtyard, we're doing something similar, where we're doing the same type of tuck pointing work. And here we're having similar problems because of this chamfer that's directing water right at that joint. And right at that joint is where that bottom flange occurs.
Which is the
But it's not
angle
as
in the
severe.
brick, right? The
Yeah,
chamfer's
yeah,
the
so
angle.
when we come back with new brick, we're not doing that chamfer. And in 1998, 2000, when some of your additions were done, they didn't do the chamfer then either. So we're replacing only a couple of courses over those windows, so it's much less in scope, and the steel isn't in as bad a shape, but the brick ties were still not the best, like we saw up above as well. So the second line item of the amendment is for the repair work needed to do it at the courtyard level.
Tracy, all of this, like the I-beam on the first window that you showed us is coming apart now. When they reinforce it, isn't going to have any issue with the windows sitting below it, and because it looks like, you know, you're going to be sawing through things and pounding on things, and my concern would be, you know, are these windows going to get?
No, they shouldn't. So there's nothing really coming down on the window right now. The beam is still structurally sound enough to where it's not affecting the aluminum below it. There's going to be no downward pressure to affect that storefront system on the bottom.
So, we're working on a facility assessment update right now as well. So a lot of the window systems of this building, though, are of the age where they're at the end of their life cycle, though, and should, independent of this, it should be thought about, you know, a replacement cycle for a lot of these window systems.
I mentioned one thing, the most important thing, I know was mentioned is the flashing details and the ability to get water out of the system. Masonry is meant to breathe. It's meant to have water leave it, you know. Brand new buildings have air gaps between the back of the masonry and the waterproofing system. Water will get in there. It's gotta have the way to get out. That's why you're seeing that rust, because it's getting in there on the last picture, and it's just sitting there. And it's finding its way down to the drywall. So no matter the exterior look of the finished product, whether it be a tuck-pointed brick or a metal panel system or whatever long-term, the flashing details behind are like the most critical thing to the building system, so.
And we talked a little about that beam, because that's a structural beam, it's holding snow while it's up there too, and making sure that is all up to date. And if we really think about, this is something that happened 49 years ago, Dr. Yarborough reminds me, it's not 50 yet. So
48.
48 years ago. And so through an unfortunate circumstance of that wall starting to lean forward, it gave us an opportunity to really dig into and find and try and fix problems. Because if we weren't to do this now, that beam would continue to rust, and you would have more water problems, because this is ultimately leading to water getting into the building, whether it's a classroom or people, and sometimes people just get used to that. Oh, it just leaks in that corner. Well, there's a reason for that, and so.
It doesn't get better.
Huh?
It never gets better.
Right, and there's always a reason for it. So one part of this, it's unfortunate we have to spend money on this, because this isn't anything exciting that everyone's like, ooh, did you do new brick? Like, no one cares, right? But at the end of the day, we're fixing a structural problem to this building, and at the cost of building things new, it'd be hundreds of millions of dollars to redo this building. So if this is what we have to do 50 years in to fix this brick, then, you know, it's what we have to do.
There's no insurance coverage for this at any point?
I will go and double check. I don't believe so. You know, the first time we believed it was snow that was pushing that, and that was approved. But this time, this is something structurally that they intentionally built this way. So I really don't. My understanding from that conversation when we filed the claim was that if it's something that was in the plans, like, otherwise they would be paying things out when stuff like this happens. But I will ask just to confirm.
So it's not under warranty anymore?
No, I don't.
Nobody does a 50-year brick warranty?
This was built in the middle of the 70s, where
I know.
everything was just, the world was a totally different place. And they were just throwing bricks up everywhere, so. That's about it.
So speaking of bricks, so I see the adjustment that's being made, the 600,000 that's here. You said the bricks are already there, so the bricks are not factored into the 600,000. If we didn't have the bricks, is there an idea of that additional cost that would have been there, I suppose?
I don't know exactly how much that value is.
I haven't done that big of a forensic analysis on it yet.
I was just curious, if we had basically set aside X amount for this brickwork. In that original scope, we have a scope change to then fix what we found underneath it of 600,000. What did we budget originally for this fix? What are we adding on to?
It was 425, I believe, is what we approved as the total project cost.
So 425 plus, and this is plus the 600 plus the 640, so 425 plus the potential of 678 is where the
That's a
increase
worst
in
case
cost and
scenario.
scope is.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
The-
And Ringland and DLA, when those costs come
678
in,
back sheet,
will
right?
evaluate those
Plus the
proposals and
four
make sure that they make sense.
Right, we budgeted and approved 400,000 before we got into it and saw the rusty back sheet with the,
I don't know if I
Schedule of work and-
necessarily have the page. You're talking about, there's the recommendation. That's 768.
yeah,
You said 670.
oh, so
Were you just transposing numbers?
I did the 640,
Yeah.
maybe that's probably, probably 648, but 768 plus the
Okay, so
400,000.
you said 678. That's why I was wondering if we have two different numbers here.
No, no,
You just
no, thank
okay.
you.
IWAS automatically puts a 10% contingency and fees in there, but those are conservative numbers. And
Right.
so those do not reflect the actuals that Ringland would be working on.
Sure, the reason my
Providing
question,
later.
just to see original scope plus the change request that we're looking
And
So we
for.
don't double pay for the brick is kind of,
Right.
like it's not in the original.
Yeah,
The brick that would be on above that clear story was in our initial GMP for this scope of work. Any investigation, remediation of rust, improvements of the structural integrity of the beam, et cetera, beyond the initial scope is obviously not in the 440,000.
There's no scenario where we have to replace the I-beam, is there?
I'll speak to that. That is probably worst case scenario that I've already thought about and went down that road in my head of what it would take. And that's why, upon DLA's suggestion, we did bring in the structural engineer, and the structural engineer's recommendation is to clean the beam and getting it down to bare metal. That's when we figure out how we can stiffen it and keep what's there with the same structural integrity, because say we were to just put the masonry back and just leave it as is, don't redo the flashing deals, don't put it in a stainless steel drip edge, don't pad out the back with insulation, then you're gonna have the same problem. That beam is gonna keep degrading, it's gonna keep rusting, so we would remove all the rust there, put everything back. It's already that much thinner. Maybe 10, 15 years down the road, I can't really say. You have, here's your I-beam, and then here's your roof load going up on that I-beam. You risk having to come in and shore up all of your bar joists running on the inside of the cafeteria, which is going to be substantially more. We'd be looking at conservatively at least $1 million to come in, support everything, shut down the main thoroughfare within inside of the school where there's a ton of foot traffic with students and educators, and I've been in there during lunch. It's crazy. It's a madhouse.
So unlikely, I guess, but we don't
Yes,
know
that's
until
worst case
the
scenario.
investigation of the structural
We
engineer.
won't know for sure
Sure.
until the structural engineer does his calculation. But it is, should be noted that that 200 lineal feet is made up of several sections of beam, and those W sections go from column to column. So there are, you know, if worst case scenario, you had one beam or something like that that had serious degradation, it's not saying that is the same for all. And we do know that the ones on the ends were in better shape. The worst
That's the
pictures
next
that you saw
question.
were the ones in the middle. So-
Perfect.
yeah.
So,
Any other questions?
Is it something to do with the windows being above, under the beams? That's why they're falling apart faster than the end
no,
ones? or-
it has everything to do with putting two courses of brick together with chamfered edges and masonry or stone top, and not having any way in the middle for water that's gonna inevitably get in, because mortar and bricks are like sponges, letting that water weep back out before it hits the steel.
We're pulling water directly onto that beam.
Yeah, for 50 years, 40.
So she's done pretty good.
Yeah?
So talk to me about windows. You said our windows are coming to end of life. We do this repair. How long remains on the life of those windows, and what's the cost to replace those windows if we proceed with this path?
That is something that we're looking at, you know, kind of in the scheme of facility assessment and gauging, you know, the different ages and the priorities of the different window systems. But between that and doors, you know, there's a life cycle to everything. And, 50 years is a pretty good, for the older part of the buildings, is a
True.
pretty
Doors are
good start.
easier, so you're just saying not the frame of the windows, let me get that correct. You're
It
talking
could
about the
be.
actual windows?
It could be as simple as doing all the caulking, which is what we're doing now as part of the tuck
Okay.
pointing project. There are some other window systems that I've seen as we've been walking the building. We're not 100% done with our walkthrough, but we've definitely seen some areas, on the exterior doors that have kind of the borrowed lights attached. Where at the bottom, things are rusting out a bit, and so if that's the case, we would recommend replacing the whole framing system, so there's different situations.
And replacing the framing system is not this level of effort, right? I'm just looking
No.
to, again,
It's still a
maybe,
lot of
but
work.
It's a lot, but yeah, it wouldn't be having to deal with the structure above.
there's no
It's
cost
just the
benefits to
window.
doing something here now, where there's enough life left on those windows that this still makes the most sense for the correct path.
There's a way we could get them, and by the time.
Yeah, that is a very good question, and I think, we would probably say if we had the luxury of some time of ordering a window system while you're mobilized and up here working in this space, that would make sense. But I don't know that we have that amount of time right now.
Kurt, this won't be the only building that windows will show up in the next 10 years too.
No,
so-
I'm sure, I just want to make sure that we're in there and we're around a load-bearing item that
Sure.
it doesn't make sense that we're not doing something and then ripping it in and doing another added $200,000 worth of cost to replace the windows, just as overhead to undo what we're doing right now.
We wouldn't be undoing anything, but what you might see.
Bad choice of words, it
is
just is
in
a.
the future, you might see more economy of scale if you're doing a bigger window replacement project. Whereas right now, if you're just buying that 200 lineal feet of window, right now just for this, yes, you would have some savings because you're not remobilizing in that area of work, but you're also buying a small amount of windows compared to, say, a possible future project where you're doing a much bigger window replacement. So, it's kind of,
Also,
And
you
that's-
shouldn't have to do any like selective demolition for what would be repaired now to get access to remove the window later to replace it. I think
So
that
you got
maybe-
the better words, remobilization.
So I think.
Selective
because
destruction.
That's
Or
where,
demolition.
that's where you end up getting, you're worried about that, where you're gonna say
Mm-hmm.
5 to 10 years from now, or are we gonna have to take that whole joint off and remove that layer of brick that we just built now and fixed to get access to demo that header out and all that
Exactly the
stuff?
question.
Very unlikely based off of, that approach where you'd be able to get all that frame out and go section by section with a, aluminum curtain wall manufacturer, but a cowl wall system or some other type of manufacturer is probably like 10-week lead time or something right now
Okay.
based off the current market, so we are right there ready to go and this type of stuff.
For this scenario, you're not gonna have to touch any of the brickwork that we do above that existing storefront system right now. Because we're tying in stiffener plates going back to the web, perpendicular with the beam, going into the hollow cavity, so perpendicular to the beam going into the hollow cavity, and then adding an L brace or bracket, a piece of steel, an L beam coming off of the stiffener
out like
plates.
so it's independent of the window system. So in the
Perfect.
future, the window system can be removed without messing up anything from here up that we're doing now.
Perfect.
We're gonna cross our fingers on those windows while we do boilers, chillers, fire.
Oh, believe me, my goal was not to add cost or scope, but I didn't want to be like later on going, well, if we would have
We
just
could've
done the
saved the
windows, we could have
windows.
saved $1 million, yeah.
Plywood and caulk will fix it. Kidding, I'm kidding.
So one other note on this too, as long as this moves forward, on recommendation in December that the board votes that this is emergency expenditure because there's no time to bid this, these guys are on site, so, we really can't, they gotta move now.
I did speak to ISBE, and the person, Mr. Runge, who does review these, said all I have to do is give him a call, and he'll move this to the top of his queue to review it. So it doesn't have to be deemed an emergency amendment or anything like that. So if it is approved, I'll call him right away and let him know it's in the system, in the Iowa system.
But I need it as emergency expenditure on the bid, on the procurement side of it in December.
Well, Josh, it says on here that these are violations, it says a description, are we being fined for something like this? or-
Nope, so that's how the life safety, so anything life safety, you'll say it's a current like code violation. It's not a violation based on when this building was built, but this is the line item that is bad that we need to fix. And so we're noting this is wrong.
Yes.
The school
And we're
code would
fixing
say something like you need to have a sound exterior, you know, and I'm saying that, or we're saying that water is infiltrating your exterior, so that's the code violation, so that allows us to then, you know, write the amendment for that.
Good to know. Thank you guys very much for coming.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I completely understand.
Safe travels.
Thank you.
Although, Chris, we'll see you tomorrow.
Yes, you will.
All right, there are no announcements and discussion?
Michael, where's this finance coming from? Josh?
Yes, so this will come from our life safety funds. I can look at the exact amount. We were projected to have over $900,000 in there by the end of the year. So hopefully this number is close to 500,000, not 7. But there is funds in there to cover these kinds of things. Because we are already finishing our life safety survey. We are already doing the original $400,000 in work. But there is funds in that fund that will cover this.
Okay. So if it goes up way over, we're not gonna be taking it out of important things like education or transportation or,
No, because then we'll have to bring it back to talk about that.
Yeah.
Right now, that's why it has to be coded in such a way that it goes from life safety. If anything else happens where it changes, then we have to figure out what we have to do.
Yeah.
We'll have to pull the money from somewhere, but it doesn't mean that we pull it from education.
Yeah.
But it needs to be.
well, I'm just thinking, you know, some of these that are the biggest amounts that come out, so.
Let's hope we don't have to have that conversation.
Duct tape and cloth comes out.
We have it at the moment, so.
Plywood, structural.
Anybody else? Larry? Nope, okay. All right, can I get a motion and a second to approve, recommendation to approve Harlem High School Life Safety Amendment number 12 to repair and reinforce exterior brick wall?
Motion.
Second.
Mr. Thompson?
Yes.
Mr. McKnight?
Yes.
Mrs. Carlson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Hastings?
Yes.
Mrs. Meeks? Aye. Mr. Sterling?
Aye. All right, I need a motion and a second to go into executive session to discuss negotiations 5 ILCS 120-2 C2.
Motion.
Second.
Mr. McKnight?
Aye.
Mrs. Carlson?
Aye.
Mr. Smith?
Yes.
Mrs. Hastings?
Aye.
Mrs. Meeks? Aye. Mr. Sterling?
Aye.
Mr. Thompson?
Aye.
All right, we are going into closed session.